Well, that had a completely different connotation a month ago when Dr. Robinson and I chose that song. It was down by the riverside. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not down. The riverside is right there. It'll take me a while. It'll take me a while to adjust, but it was a rousing hymn, one that we need to dance and sing. So listen, the study War No More thing, to do what we've done all our lives, to celebrate Columbus Day, is such an injustice. I know, it's what we grew up with, right? This is what we do. But what myths from childhood do you wish were true? Is this one of them? I wish that little fairies slept on moss at the bottom of tree trunks, and a pot of gold was really at the end of the rainbow. This is what I wanted in my childhood. I still want that. We had Columbus Day at school, we celebrated it, but now that I'm grown, I know those fantasies from childhood are not true. There is a biblical scripture that pertains to changing one's view when one knows better. I'm going to share the words from Corinthians with a slight edit for gender-inclusive purposes. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. But when I became an adult, I put away childish things. Many grown people want to cling to childish perceptions. I do. And yet, when new truths are revealed, when I read and I learn more, it's untenable to continue supporting old myths. There's one story that seems deeply intertwined into the fabric of our society. Consider this one. When we were children, most of us learned that, quote, I'll bet you know this one. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. And that is why we celebrate Columbus Day every year in October in the United States. Okay, what do we now know about Columbus? I'm saying this with grace. We didn't know this until more research has come up, and now we know more. What do we know about Columbus? What is authentic about the Columbus story, and what is not? What are the facts regarding the establishment of Columbus Day? In a powerful read titled All the Real Indians Died Off, and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz and Dina Gallio Whitaker shared this fact, quote, if we are to be accurate about a national origin myth of discovery, it would be more appropriate to say that Columbus discovered the Bahamas, Hispaniola, and Cuba, except that from an indigenous viewpoint, he did not discover anything. Indigenous peoples assert instead, not humorously, that they discovered Columbus. Not only could Columbus not have discovered a country that didn't yet exist or play any actual role in its creation, but he also utterly failed to comprehend, let alone respect, the people he stumbled upon in the mistaken belief that he had arrived in the East Indies. From an indigenous standpoint, he has been wrongfully venerated. This revelation and others have prompted cities and states to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. In 2019, NPR reporter Leila Fadel explained that the move away from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day was and remains controversial, especially among some of our Italian Americans. You see, although Colorado became the first state to establish an official holiday in honor of the Italian explorer in 1906, it was not until 1937 that Columbus Day gained federal status. 1937. Fidel said Columbus was an Italian explorer. His day was first adopted as a way to really humanize and celebrate Italians who were vilified and discriminated against at that time. Anybody who knows U.S. history knows that through the years, groups of people have been the ones to be despised, right? So it was in an effort to lift up Italian Americans, but that did not seem like a bad thing to do in 1937. People in power did not know the facts. However, with the rise of ethnic studies in the post-civil rights era, we have learned so much more. For one thing, we have learned that Columbus never set foot in North America. Here are some other facts that have surfaced after researchers examined Columbus's own writings and from journal entries written by eyewitnesses at the time, primarily from the accounts of a priest known as Bartholomew de las Casas. From Dunbar, Ortiz, and Gilio Whitaker's book, we have these facts. By the time Columbus made his first journey across the Atlantic, he'd been a slave trader for 12 years under the Portuguese flag. But initially, it was gold he was looking for, not slaves. He first made landfall in the Bahamas and was greeted by the friendly Arawaks, who gave Columbus and his men food, water, and gifts. Columbus noticed they wore small bits of gold jewelry. Here is what Columbus wrote, quote, "As soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and give me information of whatever there is in these parts." On his second voyage, imagining bountiful gold resources and in an effort to extract the precious metal, Columbus set up large estates run by forced Indian labor. He created quotas, and if they were not met, the Arawaks encountered severe punishment. The priest Lacasas reported that as retribution for not fulfilling the quotas, hands, forgive me for saying from the pulpit something so ugly, it's shameful, but nevertheless, our ears need to be open for truth. The Arawak slaves were often severed. The hands were severed if the quotas weren't reached, and they were left to bleed to death. If an escape was attempted, the Arawak slave was chased by dogs and killed. That's hard to hear, isn't it? Lacasas wrote, "So little gold existed in Hispaniola, that the island turned into a killing field." Quote. Another little known fact about Columbus is that he was well acquainted with the doctrine of discovery, and this is so important because our Christian heritage in our two denominations, we're Christian. Unitarians, Universalists were fundamentally Christian from way back. As many of you know, we are more diverse now. Jews, Christians, atheists, agnostics sit among us. Hindus, we're much more diverse. But at the time, the doctrine of discovery was quite prominent, and Columbus was very much a part of that movement. The proclamation stated the papacy was to lay claim to spiritual lordship over the world, especially over the heathens or those who were not Christian. Here's more information from Dunbar, Ortiz, and Gilio Whitaker's text. Quote, "The Romanist pontifex granted a monopoly on the African slave trade to Portugal and reinforced the European imperative to subdue all non-Christians by enslavement and land seizure. The doctrine of discovery is, to this day, one of the bedrock principles by which the United States administers its relationship with American Indians." Indigenous inferiority, European superiority is thus still affirmed as the predominant paradigm in federal Indian law. So, leaving all other research aside, let's consider just these three basic facts alone in support of why we want to say Monday is Indigenous Peoples' Day. 1, Columbus never set foot in North America. 2, he considered himself and his fellow Europeans superior. And 3, when he did encounter the native people who lived on the land, when he arrived for the first time, Columbus caused massive suffering. Do you see how the residue of blatant disregard for diversity of people is built into our society today? How the European American superiority that includes Christian religious hierarchy continues to uphold oppression, resulting in modern day forms of slavery and land domination. If you wonder if that's still a movement and a presence, Project 2025. Mike will share that on Thursday night. The growing movement to adopt an Indigenous Peoples Day instead of the former Columbus Day is not about political correctness. I hate that when people say, oh, you're just woke. Like that's, I want to be woke. I want to know the truth. It's about the unfolding of historical facts and then leaning towards celebrating the survival of Indigenous peoples and away from honoring the myth of Columbus. It is about joining a larger global movement that involves renouncing what Indigenous peoples and other social justice activists view as a celebration of domination, bloodshed, torture, slavery, murder, genocide. This move is about uplifting the survival of a people rather than atrocities inflicted by a conquistador. So, if after exploring the facts we cannot commit to making the changes for ourselves, won't we consider adopting this transition for our children? Imagine the real-life scenario. Chickasaw Nation citizen and director of the UCLA American Indian Studies Center, Shannon Speed, shared. Regarding Columbus Day, Speed said, the actions of Columbus are not, quote, actions anyone wants to celebrate. Imagine this, it causes further trauma. For example, Indigenous children are going to school and being forced to hear about and to celebrate the person who set into motion the genocide of their people. That is incredibly painful. It creates ongoing harm. I don't want to do that. I know you don't either. I'm going to share closing words by Black Elk. Hear me. Four corners of the world, a relative I am. Give me the strength to walk the soft earth. Give me the eye to see and the strength to understand. Look upon these faces of children without number, that they may face the winds and walk the good road to the day of quiet. This is my prayer. Hear me. Blessed be. Jeremy, just one more thing. Would the board members of UC please rise? I want you all to notice these individuals who, in the times of great crisis and challenge, aside from our discussion about Columbus Day, but our discussion about when we meet, how we meet, these are the people that are helping to make those decisions. If you have comments, questions, you're okay. Come on in. These are the people to ask as well as myself. Thank you, board members, for agreeing to make the difficult decisions in times of challenge. Thank you.